and welcome to the Dancing Bear Enlightenment Academy Holistic Spiritual Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Beverly, and today we have a wonderful guest. It's Reverend Christine Davies. She's the chaplain and spiritual director. She is the director of spiritual care at a large trauma center and academic hospital. She also works as a trained spiritual director. She is formally a cognitive behavioral therapist and holds a Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary and the Masters of Social Work from Rutgers University. Today, she will talk to us about journeying alongside others in spiritual direction. That sounds interesting. Hello, Dr. Christine. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Doctor, sorry.
You can call me Christine is perfect. Thank you so much for having me here, Dr. Beverly. I'm excited to share a little bit about spiritual direction with your audience.
Oh, cool. That sounds pretty interesting. I'd like to hear about it. So tell us your transformational story. What got you started?
Yeah, so what got me started in more of what I would say is the healing realm is I very much wanted to be a doctor from a young age. I was convinced traditional medicine, that was the way to go. My mother was a nurse, so I think she kind of pushed me in that direction. But then as I was having my own health issues, I recognized that, oh, so much of this is guesswork, and I wasn't necessarily getting the healing from, these physicians that would come in and out. And as I was getting a diagnosis, and I realized I really wanted to heal people, but wanted to heal them in a different way. And so it was around that time that the church I was attending had a new associate pastor who took me out to dinner and just engaged me and asked me how I was doing. And that was really, I think, my first experience of having someone check in with how it was with my soul and my spirit. And all of the medical stuff was going on, but it was really more about what was happening for me in the moment in relationship to it and my relationship to the divine as a result. So much to the bewilderment of my family, I went to seminary and ultimately also went to social work school. So I did double the amount of loans. And when I was working as a social worker, I did a lot of intakes for dual diagnosis clients. And I would do a 56-page biopsychosocial spiritual assessment on people. But there was only one spiritual question. Everything else was, all of this other information that we needed to treat. But I found myself wanting to spend so long on that one spiritual question. And it was, is spirituality important to you? Yes or no? If yes, one line. I said, no, 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 this needs to be longer. And I want to live in that question. So that's really what led me to hospital chaplaincy first. So being with those patients who are in distress and their families and often at end of life, and helping them to, search for their own meaning and purpose in the midst of things. And then the spiritual direction practice kind of took off from there. And it's listening with others about what the God or the divine or the transcendent is doing in their lives. So that's what brought me to the work that I'm doing today, and I consider it such a joy to getting to hear people's stories and be with them and see how spirit is unfolding with them and for them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like hearing people's stories too.
Hmm.
Some of my patients, they'd come in, I couldn't wait. Oh, good, I get to find out what's going on
Yeah, it's
next.
such a sacred space, right? And to be trusted with that.
Yeah, yeah, I
Hmm.
agree. And I think when you're dealing with death and dying, whether it's you or someone you love, that's a wake-up call.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's when even individuals that thought that they had a specific, belief system, it calls everything into question. And our society is getting a little bit better, I think, at understanding grief and loss, but we have a long way to go.
Mhm.
And a lot of people wind up doing a lot of damage without realizing it in what they're saying to people who are grieving. So that's another kind of aspect of my work that I try to do is educate people about, what to say, what not to say, what can cause harm, and what can be helpful.
Give us a couple of examples of what not to say.
Sure. And I have more too on my website. I do a lot of newsletters around this, so I won't get to all of them, but Something I hear people say a lot is, um, oh, this happened for a reason.
Oh yeah,
And, like the type of platitudes where if the person that is going through something is saying that and it's meaningful to them, that's one thing, right? Like I don't want to take away their own existential meaning making and coping. However, if someone else who's well-meaning, right, puts that on them, that's really
judgment.
silencing,
Yeah.
yeah, what the person's situation is. I hear a lot of times in the hospital, people feel like they're not allowed to be angry at God. You are absolutely allowed to be angry at God. There may be good reason, especially given how their theology may play out. But a lot of times with institutional religion, people think, oh, that's a sin or that's blasphemy. I can't, be engaging in that way. So I think what I encourage people to do is what we talked about before, creating that space for the story and
Mhm.
listening without judgment,
Mm.
helping the other person to feel heard, normalizing their experience. We are sometimes quick to want to fix because we don't want to see people in pain, right? It's hard to sit with. And sometimes we have to sit with our own stuff first so that we can sit with others. So that's a lot of what I teach when I teach in seminary and clergy, how to be more effective in their pastoral caregiving.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, that's true. Um, Trying to remember when before my mother died, all I just said was "I love you."
Mm,
My dad too. And
mm.
my dad, after he died, jumped into my car while I was driving, almost drove off the road. I knew he, I see through the veil, so I knew he just died, and he was next to me in the car, and I'm like, oh no. So I called my brother, and he says, "Yeah, Dad died," and I says, "Yeah, but he was really upset. What happened?" So I guess he was on dialysis, and they unplugged it.
Oh,
So he wasn't
mm,
ready to go. He thought he was
mm-hmm.
asleep. So.
And what was the experience like for you seeing him in the car? Was that comforting? Was that scary? Was that a mix?
Well, I was just sad that he died.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that was the first time a deceased person came to me.
Hmm.
That was like 30 years ago.
Mm.
Since then, I've had deceased people who are like friends, or they were either a patient or a friend of a relative of a patient, and they had a message for the
Mm.
person left behind.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'd go tell, okay, this person came, because I don't call on the dead. I think that's wrong, but that's my belief. Some people do. But sometimes they just come to me and say, please give this person this message. So it's all
Mm.
people that I know, and I know the person they want me to give the message to.
What a
Uh,
gift.
yeah, it's,
Or a burden, depending. I would imagine it could be both.
well, actually, it's never been a negative experience.
Mm.
But I did, after my mother died, I waited 3 days um, to be sure she'd crossed over, because sometimes people get stuck. So I wanted to
Mm.
wait 3 days, and she told me never to go deliberately visit dead people because it can hurt them. And one of the Buddhists that I studied with said the same thing, that you're pulling their soul. If they've reincarnated, you're pulling their soul away from their body.
Mm.
And if they're driving, they could have an accident. It depends on how evolved they are.
Mm.
Can you
Mm-hmm.
drive and talk to us interdimensionally at the same time? You know, so that's why I don't personally go and retrieve souls and talk to them. I know there's a
Mm.
that do
But
that.
but they find you.
Yeah, apparently. Well, if you're really intent on a message, and you want to make sure that that person gets that message, then I
Mm.
guess you would try to find someone that could deliver it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and someone that's warm-hearted and that they can trust and is
But
open.
if it's your loved one, you can go into a meditative state and
Mm-hmm.
there any message. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
happened with my dad. He came to me and I got, the information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people I know who have been bereaved talk about certainly having conversations or having their loved ones appear to them in dreams, and for many it is really quite comforting.
Mm.
And what I try to teach everyone is, we receive it all without judgment, right? What works for one person may not work for another. Just as, for you, yeah, you got a clear message, don't go visit. Other people, that may be comforting to them. And so really trying to expand the scope of, what is healing and helpful for people going through grief.
Yeah. And like you said, it's different for everybody. That's why I
Mhm.
wanted to know, what do you think we shouldn't say? Because,
Mhm.
you may have all the good intentions in the world and
Mhm. Mhm.
mouth disease, as they say, or try
Yep.
the other two.
Absolutely. No, it all comes from this place of well-meaning, right? We are wanting to cheer the other person up, but it
Mhm.
is recognizing, the sometimes the best thing that you can say is nothing, right?
Mhm.
I had a professor in seminary who said, you just show up and shut up, right? Because you could say lots of things, but sometimes your presence is what matters most, and holding that space
Mhm.
for the individual, and saying, I'm with you. I'm here with you in this pain, versus, kind of some of the toxic theology that we can sometimes, regurgitate that we've picked up somewhere along the way.
I think one of the lessons for a lot of us women is we
Mm.
don't like dead space.
Mm-hmm.
Like fill it.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially if you have a podcast, right? You,
Yeah.
you don't want dead air. Right. So in chaplaincy and as well in my spiritual direction practice, we have a lot of silence, right? And some of it can be contemplative in
Mhm.
nature. And I think of the Jewish tradition and sitting Shiva, right? And it is really about the silence, and that the bereaved is the first to break that. And so you're right, it's our own anxiety or our own feeling uncomfortable, versus, just sitting and letting it be, and letting the divine kind of work through that silence as well.
Well, that's when the divine comes through.
That's what I have
The
found. Could be
words.
different for a lot of people, but yeah, I tend to need the silence.
That's cool. So, you said you're, let me see here, journeying alongside others in spiritual direction. So talk
Mhm.
about what spiritual direction means for you and how.
Absolutely. So spiritual direction, not a lot of people know about it, and I only found out about it a few years ago. And I think it's, in some ways, it's this best kept secret, but it shouldn't be. I wish more people knew about it, because I think a lot of people would benefit from it. So, um, and I'll say this, some people call it spiritual direction, others call themselves spiritual companions or spiritual guides. I kind of go in and out, but spiritual direction is kind of the traditional term for it. And individuals can learn more too at Spiritual Direction International. That tends to be the overbranching umbrella organization. And it's really it's having an individual spiritual director, and they do have group. I just do individual, sitting with someone, listening to whatever they want to bring forth, right? So I think of it as listening to the divine or the transcendent or God, however one defines it, together with the other person. And we uncover what spirit might be doing in their lives. So sometimes my we call them directees or clients. Sometimes my directees come and they say, I didn't know what I was going to talk about today. But then all of a sudden, as they sit in silence, sometimes we pray together, or sometimes we do a meditation or a reading. We see what springs forth into that space. So it's really bearing witness to how it is with one's spirit, right? And how their own sense of spirituality is manifesting. And one of the reasons that I think it is so beneficial, especially, and this may be true for some of your listeners, right? Not everyone finds meaning within religion and the institution, right? It's a path for some, but not everyone. And yet people are still seeking that individual connection and rituals or questions or ways in which to engage with the transcendent, but they don't always have a roadmap.
Mhm.
And so sitting with a spiritual director can kind of open some of that up, and deepen, your relationship with yourself, with community, with the divine. And so there are some spiritual directors who are Christian, who are Jewish, who are Buddhist. Most of us are trained to be with whatever faith tradition or no faith tradition, and allow that person to really name what it is that they're needing. And I tend to meet with people about once a month, sometimes a little bit more frequently if someone's in a particular crisis. But it's really over time, getting to see where it is with one's, soul and what's going on for them and how we can create that space to hold that for that moment.
Hmm. That's nice. Because then it doesn't matter what the person's belief system is, whether they're
Right.
religious, non-religious,
Hmm.
an atheist, and still
Absolutely.
tap into that inner voice, whatever you
Hmm.
call it. Yeah, that's great.
Hmm.
Pretty powerful.
Hmm.
That's nice. Um, so what are some of the issues that you see that your clients are bringing to you? I mean, today,
Hmm.
since 2020, things have really changed in terms of the issues coming up for people. So what are you seeing?
Hmm. Yes. So we talked about the anger at God a little bit before. That is certainly
I've
very
seen,
prevalent,
yeah.
right? And that follows a lot of, some of the traditional theology. If someone believes that God is testing me, and then they're going to believe that God is not this nice deity if I'm getting tested and be angry at God. So that is definitely there. Alienation is a big one that I see. Feeling separated
Mm,
from either God, or feeling separated from themselves and not feeling at home in their own bodies, or separated from community. Those are kind of the three realms that I use to define spirituality, right? How do we feel at home in ourselves? How do we feel connected to others? And then the divine or transcendent. And so I think anytime there's kind of a break in any of those three areas, there's the potential for what I would call spiritual distress. And so that's some of what I see. Sometimes it is about, um, an estrangement from a family, say, and one's family of origin, and that is causing, great stress and strife in someone's life, and it comes into it from a spiritual nature, wondering like, what is my, goal in this world, to be able to be with my family or not with my family. So I see that. I see a lot of people searching for meaning
mhm.
and purpose. And so for some people, they find that in their jobs, but for a lot of people that I'm fortunate, I find it in my job. For a lot of people, that's not a privilege or luxury that they have. And so trying to find that in other areas of their life and trying to have, those values brought out and live in a way that they find meaningful is another area that I see a lot of people struggle with as well. And then, depression and anxiety and chronic pain. I think we're all familiar with a lot of those things. And then it's just the ways in which that intersects with one's spirituality and what that may do to one's spiritual nature.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that when we have that uneasiness inside, whether it's from spiritual or just unresolved emotional stuff, that it can manifest as physical pain.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you deal with it, the pain goes away. It's like, oh, my elbow doesn't hurt anymore, or why did my knee hurt? Oh, okay.
Just the other day, I had a relatively stressful day, and I was like, I have a headache. I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is about, and I am not surprised at all. This headache is here.
Oh, that's
So,
stress.
hmm.
Do you see a lot of fear these days? People dealing with a lot of fear?
I see fear. I mean, the question I always ask around fear is what is the fear of, right? And
Mhm.
so I'm trying to think of the people I work with. I think sometimes it's the fear of the unknown, is what comes up a lot for people, especially as people are discerning a decision maybe in their lives and not knowing which way to go or feeling stuck in a situation or a circumstance. So I do think that that is one. I think a lot of fear for the world has been coming up, which is not surprising for anyone that's paying attention. And I think what goes with that is helplessness,
Mm,
and not knowing how to reconcile that with who they may feel called to be in this world.
yeah, I'm seeing a lot of fear also. So that does.
Yeah, what type of fear are you tending to see?
Um, well, like you were saying, fear of the unknown only
Yeah,
main
is that a big one? Okay.
how do you deal with that? And that's where trust in source and letting go of the fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
I was young, I couldn't even be around anything dead. And I bred parakeets, and I had this wonderful parakeet, Chipper the first, and he was well trained. He could do all kinds of things. And when he died, I couldn't even touch him. I literally scooped him up into one of those aluminum foil pie plates and put one over him. And I went out in the backyard and I couldn't even touch him, and I couldn't even get near dead fish or anything. It was just crazy. And then, when you die a few times and you realize you don't really die, and all it is just a body left behind because everything else is gone, you let go of that fear. When you let go of that kind of fear, it changes your life and your perspective. So what I see with a lot of fear in people is they're afraid of dying. And so they're not in touch with their soul. And they need to, you're a soul having a human experience, and that's what they need to understand, and they're not quite there yet, some people.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see that in the hospital setting. And I think we all went through that in a major way during the beginning of COVID. Everyone was wrestling with their mortality. All of us chaplains were like, "Oh, we've been sitting with this for quite some time. This is not, this is not new to us in this way." But it really is about that acceptance and how do you get there and doing the work that one needs to do at the end of their life when they have the opportunity, right? Not all people have the opportunity to do that if there's crisis or trauma. And I think in the hospital setting, I also deal with more fear of the loss from the part of the family, right? Not wanting to lose. And sometimes I'm with a patient and the patient has accepted, this is my diagnosis. I'm ready. I'm in pain. This is going to be a relief for me. I've done everything. I've said everything I wanted to say, but it's the family that isn't there. And that's completely understandable, but hard to walk. But yet it tends to be in my spiritual direction practice. It is more of the not as much of the larger fear of death, but I think it comes through, especially for my individuals that are dealing with major medical issues, of just the fear of on a daily basis, right? Not being able to trust my body to do the thing that I'm wanting it to do, or not being able to trust my mind, and that's where that first break in the spirituality can come through, right? Not feeling like myself. I hear a lot of.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. What about there's a lot of talk now, some in Canada and California, about what do they call it? Assisted suicide? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I could probably get in some trouble if I were to talk about that more fully. But I do happen to live in a state where that is allowed. It's medical aid to the dying.
Oh,
I've not been witness to that. So my only frame of reference is really having, being in the field that I am, having watched lots of movies and documentaries and read a lot about it. What I would recommend, I read not so long ago a beautiful book. I mean, it is heartbreaking and you will cry through it, called In Love by Amy Bloom.
okay. We had a little hiccup there. So you were about to tell us about the book.
Right. So I would recommend to anyone that's interested in learning more about that, a book called In Love, a memoir of love and loss by Amy Bloom. And it is a heartbreaking read, but I think it's an important one. And she talks about essentially her husband choosing to end his life. And I believe it was in Europe somewhere. I can't remember which country, but there's a whole organization that they work with and they go through the whole process. And so anyone that's interested in that or anyone that has loved and lost really might find that a helpful resource to think about those issues.
Yeah, I was wondering how family and loved ones would deal with someone who decides to leave.
Yeah, it complicates the grief even more, right? Grief is hard for everyone, no matter what. And then there are certain circumstances that are going to make it even more complex.
Wow, that
Mhm.
world seems to be getting more and more complicated.
Hence the need for guides and directors and people to come alongside and help walk with folks as we sort out these complexities and how they imprint on our spirit.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to share is when my mother was dying, I knew she wouldn't leave as long as I was at the hospital.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I lived in California at the time, and she was in Arizona. So I said my goodbyes and left, and I got home, and that's when she finally died.
I
So
can't tell you how common that is.
yeah.
And when I'm in the hospital, we often have people that the families will then feel guilty. And we say, no, 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 this happens
Mhm.
all the time. And to me, that's like maybe the last piece of control we have, right? As we're departing this world I don't think everyone is able to pick when, but and wanting to almost spare family of that. And then I've also sat with people who have died with their family right around their bedside. So it can certainly vary, but we see that quite a bit in the hospital. And it could be someone just going out to like the cafeteria to get a cup of coffee, and that's the moment quite frequently.
Well, people who are dying frequently are not in their body.
Hmm.
You can see souls, you look up, and they're usually up on the ceiling
Hmm.
somewhere looking down. And so when you see them up there, they're just waiting for you to leave so they can leave. If you can't see that, then you can touch them. I found that when you touch someone who isn't in their body, you can feel it. You can
Hmm.
feel a difference in their energy.
Yeah, well, and you, I think, are especially gifted in that, intuition and that feeling and the energy. I don't know that that's true for everyone. They might want that and wish that, but that does seem like a special connection that you have.
I am an empath, yeah. So,
Hmm.
but I believe everybody is empathic, and you
Mm.
just have to develop the skill, and you develop it through meditation.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
I think that with all the death that has happened in the last 4 years, helping people through that, both the living and the people transitioning, is a very important skill and gift that you're sharing with the world.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, thank you. It is a tender space to be with people when they're especially vulnerable in that way.
So let's talk about your gift. 5 simple spiritual practices to try today. Tell us about that free gift you have for our audience.
Yeah, so sometimes people think of spiritual practices as this long prescriptive list of what they need to do. I need to read this religious text. I need to meditate for an hour every day. And we can make it so much more simple and easy. And it can be practices that you may already do. Okay.
So tell us about your gift.
So my gift is on my website. It is five simple spiritual practices you can do today. Oftentimes when we think about spiritual practices, we may think too large, like, oh, I have to read through this entire religious text, or I have to meditate for an hour. But there are really simple things that you can do that are not that onerous and that you can try on and can be fun. And so I list some of those out as things to try. And they may be things that you didn't see as spiritual or sacred before, but a way that you can infuse some meaning in it. So if you go to my website, christinevdavies.com/gift, you can enter your information and I will get that to you.
Wonderful. So those of you who are listening, I'm going to say that link again. It's Christine with a C, CHRISTINE. V is in Victor, Davies, DAVIES.com/gift. So ChristineVDavies.com/gift. Wonderful, Christine. Thank you for that gift. Do you have any closing words for our audience?
Well, it's so lovely to get to connect with you and hear some about your experiences as well. So this has been, such a neat time for me. And I think wanting your listeners to know that they can access the sacred and meaning making and whatever aspects of ritual and spirituality that they may be looking for. And I want them to consider trying out a spiritual director if that's something that they think would be useful to them.
Very good. Thank you so much for being our guest today. And thank you all for joining us and listening. And we appreciate a like and a subscribe. And remember to be the light you want to see in the
Mm.
world.